Shalom friends, Aaron and Teresa back for part 2.
Children.
So Teresa is home,
Yeah.
recovering, not as well as she would like to if she had had a natural birth, but recovering
well,
very well
considering
considering
that
you
I
had
just-
a cesarean.
Yes.
Had your guts lasered open and stuff moved aside and pulled out of the way and stuffed back in and then burned back together again. I mean, it's a crude way to put it, but that's what it is.
It's amazing.
How are you not sweating as bad as me? It's hot out here. I have to go cool off somewhere. We're gonna take a dip in the lake after this, I think. Yeah, you're gonna go in there with me? Take a little dip? I don't think there's any swimming over here. All right, so you have anything to say before I kind of take off with this part of it, or?
Well, I think, I don't know, I feel like for me it's worth mentioning, but as a mom, it was strange for me to not have him with me.
Yeah.
But your dad came and that was really special.
Yeah, my dad came to visit, and I was really sad for my dad that he left before we were able to hold Rennie. I'll say that it looked like Rennie was bionic, and they really, I almost get the impression that they want you, this might sound unfair, to feel like they're doing more than they're doing. The only thing Rennie needed was time for his lungs to finish developing. Because that's ultimately the last major organ that needs to develop. And when babies come out early, even up to 6-8 weeks early, they really can have nothing going on other than their lungs just aren't done yet. And so they don't need much. There's a little bit of a fluid. It's kind of like a lubricating fluid they put in there that helps them breathe because they've been in amniotic fluid. And their lungs just haven't finished yet. And so they just kind of help them along, maybe give them a little bit of oxygen mixed with regular air. And then it's just once they get down to whatever it is, 16% oxygen, once they get close to that, then they take them off the oxygen. There's no more drips of the fluid into their lungs to help them kind of lubricate their lungs and breathe easier. But they've got all these things on. They've got the O2 sensor taped to them. They're not nursing, obviously. They're feeding them either intravenously or down a tube. They're giving them oxygen in a tube. The baby doesn't want that on. They tape all this stuff on them, and they look like there's all kinds of stuff going on. There's monitors beeping and alarms going off, and they're in a room where there's other kids that got bigger problems, and there's always something happening. It's just so busy. But when I would go in there to see him, and I would just kind of focus in on what was going on with him, there was really nothing going on with him, other than
taking care of him the way we would.
Trying to changing diapers and all of these sorts of things, and then trying to get his heart rate under control. And I'd like to get into that in a little bit, but before that, I just want to say that he was fine. I would give him the bottles that Teresa would give him. I'd feed him formula. Teresa would, once she was recovered enough, go see him in the morning for a little while when you were able to drive. I don't know how many days that was. Maybe we bumped it ahead too. You're pretty tough.
No, they told me I can drive right away, which I was really surprised about. And so I did. We haven't gone together to see him at all, I don't think, until we went to pick him up.
Yeah, no, we never went to see him together.
I right away, I would go once a day in the morning time usually.
Teresa would go early in the morning as much as she could get, as early as she could get out, and I would stay home with the kids, and then I would go work for a while.
And when your dad was there, I was able to go in the afternoon and stay longer.
Yeah, that was nice.
So that was good.
And so I would maybe go home, visit. Sometimes I would go a couple times during the day and see him. I was kind of working close where I could go see him, and then maybe I'd go home and then go late and stay late. And so when you were there, you did it too, I'm sure. When I was there, I would be the one to feed him his formula, or milk the Teresa had pumped and change his diapers and take care of anything they would let me take care of. I would try to take care of anything I could once we could hold him. But prior to holding him, we could still give him bottles.
We were able to just
put your hand under his fanny, rest up his back a little bit, change his diapers we could do, but we couldn't take him up out of his incubator and hold him.
Right.
So it's not that we couldn't touch him, just couldn't pick him up and hold him. Yeah, okay, so anything you want to say about the experience of going in there? I mean, sometimes, so they were giving him shots. I'll get into this a little bit, but one of the things that was happening was they were trying to figure out what heart drugs would keep his heart rate under control. What he had was supraventricular tachycardia. So that means it was above the ventricles and he would have a tachycardia. Essentially, it was like an extra little piece of tissue that was conductive that would cause his cause a disruption in the signals in the heart that would cause the heart rate to be higher. And they had a series of drugs that they could use. There was 4 in particular, and they kind of started off with 2 and then went to the third one, which was their catch-all, this really powerful drug that kind of always got things under control. And you know, not to get too much into this, the details, you know, they had got to the point where they were giving him all 3 of these drugs and trying to find the right level and waiting until it was in his system enough to measure how much was in there, because they could go to the point where they were giving him too much. And, you know, they were almost up against their limit with all of these drugs, trying to get him under control. Not quite, but there wasn't a lot further they could go. And he would still have what they would call breakthroughs, where his tachycardia would break through all of the drugs, which were supposed to be regulating the heart rate, and then he would go into a high heart rate. Now, he'd get up into the low 200s at the most. Wouldn't be that high, not in the 300s, because of these drugs that were really suppressing that. But they couldn't keep him under 150 or even under 160. He'd constantly break through. And there was another drug, this one I remember the name of, it was adenosine. They say was not harmful. At least they, as cardiologists, were not concerned about the effects of this drug as they were with the others. And that would kind of, it was almost like defibrillation, like just kind of shock the heart back into a normal rhythm. And normally 1 shot would work. And I'm bringing this up because you witnessed some of this, and I know that this was some of the things that was hard for you. There was times they had to give him 6, 7, 8 shots, and they're poking him all over the place, and just to try to get his heart rate to come back down, and once he broke through.
They made a joke of it. It was like they'd be like, "Oh, he's trying to show off for his parents." Like, it's funny when it's not funny. And one time I called to see how he was doing, because we can watch him on the monitor, and he was off the monitor for quite a long time, and I wanted to see what was going on.
Right.
And they told me they gave him, like, it was a lot, like 10 doses or something.
More, I think sometimes it was 12, 15.
It was like, I don't know what it was, but it was at least 10. And the doctor that I spoke to, she was like, "Oh, this is to be expected. You don't have to worry about it." And I know she was lying to me, and that was really frustrating.
Well, now that doctor is there was a team of 3 cardiologists we were dealing with. That doctor I had very little respect for. She was not honest. She was not forthcoming. She acted like she didn't have time to answer my questions. I had a big issue with her. I believe that's the doctor you spoke to. But anyhow, so that was hard for you to see that sort of thing. Again, just kind of reiterating that it was, not that it wasn't hard for me, but it was just sort of easier for me to take it in the moment, I guess. But the other thing was, they were giving him the drugs intravenously and other things intravenously, fluids intravenously, and so, you know, these IVs didn't stay very long. You know, I mean, they don't stay in adults very long. You know, the vein breaks down, and then you've got to put a new one in. And with a little person, as much as he was the Incredible Hulk in the NICU, for a little person, it got pretty hard to find spots to stick an IV. And so they were putting holes in his feet, putting holes in his head, poking holes in him everywhere. And a vein would collapse, and they'd have to go to another one. And it was really hard to watch him poking all these holes in him. And then they also had to put in PICC lines, minor surgery to put in a PICC line where they could run the fluids directly, as opposed to just separate IVs all the time. And you know, those don't last forever. Eventually, those would fail. They'd go into a bigger, artery. And one of them he had a bit of a difficult time with, but he came through okay. But I think he had 2.
The first one, it started to leak, and so they had to take it out, the PICU.
Yeah, maybe he had 3.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. So I would run. One I know was leaking, and they were going to do a surgery right away. I was at work, and I packed up and ran over there. That was a rough day. I had a horrible migraine and had some other experiences. I don't really want to. On Christmas Day, yeah, that was on Christmas Day, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. I was working on Christmas Day, trying to catch up on work, and I rushed off to see him, to be there, and I had somebody there at the hospital treat me really terribly. I'm not going to get into that right now. It's not relevant to his story, really, but it wasn't always pleasant, I guess. So what do we want to say about Rennie? I don't want to say too much more about the experience in the hospital. It's just that they couldn't get him under control. The 3 drugs that they had to use. There's one other thing about the 4th drug, I would say. But you want to say anything else about?
Oh, well, just the cardiologist saying something. Well, the cardiologist team, they work between two hospitals, and they told us that Rennie is an unusual case, and he's not responding to the drugs the way that babies normally do.
Especially the third one, which was the really powerful one.
Yes. And they said they normally see a case like his about every 2 years, and that's in between the two hospitals. So he was really unusual.
Right, and it's worth mentioning that this little heart defect that he had was not uncommon. It was actually a pretty common thing. And so they're talking about hundreds of cases. They're not talking about a dozen cases, hundreds of cases over years, and then him being really one of the toughest cases. Not only that they come across a case like his every couple of years, his was one of the toughest ones they'd seen. So it was really even more so than that it was that he was unique in the difficulty they were having with him. And it's probably a good place to mention before we forget about it that they say within 1 to 2 years it would kind of naturally resolve itself, that little bit of tissue would sort of die off and then stop disrupting the heart. And you just kind of got to get him through that. And that there are long-term issues with the drugs. They freely admit that it can cause kidney problems, growth issues, all kinds of things that can be a problem. But within the first couple of years, especially if within the first year and a half, you can get the kids who are on these heart drugs off of the drugs, whatever issues they have, liver problems, kidney problems, those things would kind of clear up, and that they would end up without any long-term effects. But it's the key is to not have them on the drugs for a long time. And there was also a surgery that could be done to just go in and remove that little bit of tissue. But the problem was they have to do that by putting tubes up into a vein and then go in with their tiny little, surgery tools to do the work, and that they don't have tools small enough to use for a person so small to get into their arteries. And they're just too small for it. They'd have to be 4 or 5 years old at least and get closer to 60 pounds before they were big enough to actually do that. So surgery was out of the question. It was something that if to save his life they had to give it a shot, they would. But there was great risk to damaging his arteries. And so that was the last, only if they really thought that he was going to die, that his heart rate was so bad and they couldn't control it. And they were getting to the point with the drugs being so dangerous that they had no other choice. But with the point of the drugs that's worth mentioning here at this point is that they didn't have any other options left. They'd exhausted all of their options. They were almost up to the ceiling as far as saturation within the blood, I suppose is how I would put it, where they could be with the level of these drugs in his system. And they weren't having the effect. In fact, he would have more breakthroughs. They were, not only were they not having as much control over his tachycardia as they wanted to, they were even losing control over it if they felt it would seem like he'd have a little bit of improvement for a while, and then he'd go back into having more and more breakthroughs. And so there was a fourth drug they could use, but it was one that they didn't want to use because it could literally just cause instant death. I mean, I don't think they said sudden death. I think they said instant death. If the baby was on this drug, is so powerful that at any moment they could literally just die, go into cardiac arrest and shut their heart off, and they're dead. So that was the only other option that we had. So getting into the third week, there wasn't improvement. They weren't getting anywhere. Surgery, which is basically not an option, and a fourth drug that could kill him instantly were really the only options left. And they were getting us geared up for the idea that he was going to be in there for the long haul, that we had no idea when we were going to get him home because they were not controlling the tachycardia. And they weren't going to let him go home, even with us giving him the drugs, without having a medical team available to give him, if necessary, dose after dose after dose of this adenosine to get his heart rate back down under 160. So we were getting ourselves prepared for this idea that we weren't, maybe for many months. I mean, we didn't know, maybe a year. We had no idea. It was really this open-ended, indefinite, and they were slowly, this is to be expected, Teresa's told once, when from the beginning they knew that his case was anything other than just what's to be expected. It was, abnormal in a lot of ways. And so it was a slow process for us to come to this understanding because it was hard to get from the docs the information that we needed to know about how serious his condition was and how unlikely it was that he was going to get home soon. So now they're starting to really prepare us for that. Like, we have no idea when he's going to get out of here. It could be a really long time. We stayed up all night. It was a Saturday night. We stayed up and we prayed after all the other kids went to bed. I don't know, 10 o'clock, stayed up and prayed. And we prayed literally all night. I mean, it was, maybe pre-dawn, but it was like the gray dawn and the birds were making noises when we finished praying. So we literally stayed up for hours and prayed for him. That next day, that Sunday, he had one breakthrough where he went into tachycardia. And I believe that it was the only time ever out of the hundreds of tachycardia breakthroughs that he had once he was on the drugs that he came out of on his own. They waited, because they would wait sometimes to see if he'd come out, because they would say if the drugs are doing their job, he might have a breakthrough, but maybe he'll come out of it on his own. The drugs will help regulate, even though he's had a breakthrough, help him get back out of this tachycardia. Well, that never happened. They would always have to give him the adenosine. So he had a tachycardia on Sunday, this early sometime around 10 o'clock, 10 o'clock after we prayed, and he got out of it on his own. That was the last time he ever had a breakthrough. That was the last time he ever had a tachycardia. And I can't stress this point enough. They had zero control over it. His tachycardia, when he would have a breakthrough, wasn't in the 300s. And that might not have been because of the doctors, right? It might have been because of the drugs. It certainly was having some suppression of this electrical activity in his heart. And that was the danger, that if they went too far with the drugs, then they suppress his heart rate too far, that he's at a resting heart rate that's too low. So he had a low resting heart rate, and then his breakthroughs weren't so dangerously high that he was going to, go into cardiac arrest in a few days. So they're trying to walk this fine middle. But they never really had it under control, right? To say really isn't even fair. They never had it under control. He was constantly having the breakthroughs. They couldn't stop it. Their drug that they would give to shock the heart back into a normal rhythm wasn't working sometimes after, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, a dozen shots. And they really didn't have any good options left. And they had no good options left, only really dangerous options left. We prayed for him all night. He has one more, gets out of it on his own for the first time, and never had another one. By Thursday, they were telling us that we were going to be able to take him home. And that Friday, we brought him home.
Yeah, it was like a surprise. Like, they're like,
Total
by
shock.
the way, he's going to be going home. We're like,
Yeah.
oh.
So they just had a few things to kind of take care of and wrap up. So from here, I would like to say that I had questions. And I remember talking to one of the cardiologists, and she just did not have time for me. She acted like talking to me was a burden and a waste of her time, and that she really wished I'd go away. And I'll say his name. Scott was his name, one of the cardiologists. And Scott, if you ever watch this, I just want to tell you thank you. From the bottom of my heart. I really just needed the way you spoke to me. You took the time with me. You took the time to explain things to me. We're intelligent people, and if you just take time, now we don't necessarily know all the medical terms, but we can learn them quickly. We can hold on to them. We can understand them, and this doctor really took the time, and I appreciated that, to help me understand where we were at. And he also told me, as a father who at that time had 3 daughters, he would not want to have his daughters be on these drugs for long, and that he would be working to get them off of those drugs as quickly as possible. He was pretty frank about that. So I got to choose who would be our cardiologist out of the team that we would follow up with, and I was taking him, weekly?
Yeah, he went weekly.
I went weekly to the cardiologist, and they would do EKG,
and then
check the levels of his drugs.
Yeah, eventually we were going monthly, but not in the beginning.
For quite a while, it was weekly, and we were administering drugs to him in suspensions, orally.
He would get drugs twice.
4 times a day. He was supposed to get them 4 times a day, and then
we had to check his heart rate.
We had to check his heart rate a couple times a day. And we got to the point where it was kind of hard because we'd have to wake him up to give it to him, and we didn't do it. And eventually we weren't giving him all 4 doses. I'll tell you that what, a bugger?
The black spider.
Oh. That's all right. Very interesting spider over here. Come on, baby. Let's not talk about the spider. He's cool, though. Wow, the kids would really enjoy seeing that spider. I'm very distracted. He's black and white. He's really big. He's hairy, and he's got kind of like green fangs. He's about that big. All right. So I really do believe that our doctor, Scott, was, I think that he suspected that we weren't giving all of the doses. He didn't specifically ask those questions. I think that he moved along. The whole goal was to wean Rennie off the drugs within his first year. And within 14 months, he was off the drugs. It wasn't a year. It was about 14 months.
But also, I think, well, I don't know. I think it's worth mentioning, like, at first, when we were starting to wean him without his permission, it wasn't purposeful. It was just that it was those nightly doses.
Right. He was sleeping. We were sleeping. We weren't necessarily getting up to give them to him, and then at some point it became purposeful.
But also, yes, at some point
because we didn't want to wake him.
But we were checking we had to check his heart rate.
Oh, listen, we never missed, and we did it more than twice a day most of the time, probably. But
I mean, it was really amazing.
Perfect heart rate every time. Yeah, never had any inkling of an issue with him. So he was doing great in terms of not having a tachycardia, and our cardiologist was, I think, moving along as quickly as he could. There was a certain protocol that he had to follow, and he had people to answer to. He couldn't just take this, one of the toughest cases they'd seen in years, take this boy off of all of his heart drugs. That's not what they did, and he wasn't going to be able to do that. He'd have people to answer to. Would he have considered it? Maybe, but he couldn't, right? So he was working on weaning Rennie off of those drugs as quickly as he could, and I don't think that everybody would have done that, and that is a key point. That God really blessed us with the right person. Now, I didn't have any really specific conversations about faith with Scott, but I believe that this is a man who shared our faith, and I have good reason to believe that. And I definitely believe that he had our son's best interest at heart, and trusted us as parents as he got to know us and didn't treat us like stupid people. And, frankly, not everybody does that, right? Not everybody really has your best interest at heart as much as they feign that or maybe even believe they do. It's not really always true. Some people just are ignorant to what it really means to have somebody else's best interest at heart. He was a very good doctor. He is a very good doctor, and God definitely blessed us with the right person to be Rennie's caretaker as a cardiologist, and I'm will be so grateful for that. Now, was it about, so Rennie's nursing at home, he's doing well, he's growing, like all of our kids are growing, he's got no problems, and then all of a sudden, we're having this like terrible problem where Rennie would nurse fine. He was nursing a lot, but he was not growing. He wasn't growing, and he was crying all the time. I mean, frankly, it was frustrating for us. It was hard for us to always be as patient as we should be, because it was just so hard to deal with him. He would scream. Now, what was that? About 4 months?
I think. Yeah.
About 4 months.
Yeah.
And so we ended up taking him to our pediatrician, and conversations between the cardiologist and the pediatrician, we really couldn't come up with, because the pediatrician didn't have an answer as to what was going on with him, but just, hey, we've got to get food into this kid. I mean, he's not making it on breast milk alone. Now, we'll tell you, we have kids that have come after. They are huge. And they were huge, and a year or sometimes even more of strict nursing, they don't want to eat, and they're huge. They're huge. Teresa was feeling like a failure as a mother, like, what's wrong with me? Hard. I'm not providing enough milk, and I'm saying that can't be so. Look at all of these others. There's no way that your milk, your nursing is not sufficient.
And I would check my milk, like I would. After he was done nursing, I would see if I could express any milk out, and I could. And
Always
so
could, yeah.
I knew that I didn't run out of milk. I still had milk to give him if he wanted more milk.
So he was actually losing weight for a little while.
It was really scary.
He looked like he was not doing well, and we were working with our pediatrician. Now, the cardiologist said that the drugs had nothing to do with it. Now, I'm not going to get into a lot of this, but if you have heart problems, one of the things you can have a problem with as a kid is your growth. That's a fact. And these heart drugs disrupt your natural heart rhythms and electrical signals within your heart. And, your heart actually sends more electrical signals to your brain than your brain says to your heart. There's a lot more going on in our heart. It's not just a mechanical pump. That makes no sense. It's much more than that. There's a lot more happening there. In fact, I absolutely believe that the heart is the seat of emotion, and there's a lot more control in terms of what's going on with his physiology, with our physiology, with our heart than is, I think, understood or let on by those who do understand. But anyway, absolutely the drugs were affecting Rennie's growth. There's no question about it. We're 100,000% convinced of that today. So we were giving Rennie blended up avocado, chicken, raw egg yolks, or barely cooked raw egg yolks. Now with guidance from our pediatrician, who was a huge help as to what we needed to do to help Rennie get the nourishment he needed to stop this. First of all, his weight loss, which wasn't going on for a really long time, but he kind of stopped growing.
He was not even on the chart.
He didn't even register on the charts as far as the growth chart, percentile chart, and Rennie still didn't grow very much.
He grew, like, we started feeding him at 4 months, which is not usual for babies. You feed, generally speaking, 6 months is when you would introduce solids. If you can wait longer if you want, but he slowly started to gain weight.
Very slowly.
He was on the chart, the percentile chart.
Yeah, I mean, it took him a long time to be on the percentile chart.
But he was always a little guy.
He was always very small, and his growth curve really didn't start to pick up until he was at the end, when we were nearly done weaning him off the drugs. I think is the point I wanted to make. But I feel like as much as we were pumping proteins and things into him, like in an extreme sort of way for somebody as small as he was, teaching him how to eat way sooner than you would. 6 months, we're doing it at 4 months, and giving him foods that you wouldn't normally be giving him. He wasn't eating baby food.
No, he was eating blended up rice and beans
eggs, chicken, avocado. Yeah, we were giving him all kinds of stuff, and even that wasn't enough to get him to where he needed to be. But it curbed the weight loss. He was growing, but he was still so small. It was just not even close to normal. This spider won't leave me alone. He keeps trying to climb on me. Isn't that interesting? He wants to be my buddy. Go on down here. So I would just like to say that if it had not been for our cardiologist weaning Rennie off of his heart meds as fast as he could, his heart drugs, we're not sure Rennie would be here. I mean, it was really touch and go. It was a scary situation. Nobody ever talked about it in those terms, but you could see the concern when we were talking to our pediatrician. It was sort of one of those things where I think maybe she wouldn't have told us real frankly how serious the situation was. But I think she probably would have, and that she realized she didn't need to, because she knew that we knew it. And it was one of those things that we didn't need to go all the way into speaking super frankly about it. Just like, okay, this is a serious concern, and we need to address it. And we did, and with her help. And thank you, Dr. Dice. That was a big deal. We really appreciate your help with Rennie. And so Rennie is still our little fella.
Yeah, he is. All of our other kids are pretty big.
Yeah. But he is tough.
Stout.
He's strong-willed.
Yeah, he's stubborn.
But he's funny.
But
he's
he
cute.
Needed that stubbornness.
He's joyful. He needed his stubbornness. He is indeed strong but mighty. He is tenacious. And he's a huge blessing, and we're so grateful for him. And, I don't know that I would say it's weekly. It's not daily, but it's probably close to weekly. I'm praying for Rennie or thinking about Rennie, and I'm just sort of overcome with thankfulness. And Rennie is,
he has physical scars
4
on
and a
his
half.
chest, so like if he ever has a shirt off, we're always reminded.
Yeah, he has his physical scars, and he's so healthy considering the rough start he had.
Yes, he is.
And God healed him. I mean, that's the point. We're almost at 30 minutes for the second part. So we got to wrap it up pretty soon. But there's no question about it.
Yeah.
That God heard and answered our prayers that Saturday and healed Rennie. He wasn't healed by heart drugs, because those heart drugs couldn't heal him. All they were meant to do was control his tachycardia long enough so that his body could heal itself, which is what was always going to happen if he could just go that long. But they could never even get it under control. And we prayed for him, and God healed him, and we brought him home. And he never had another problem except for his growth, which was because of the heart drugs. We know that we could have taken him off of his heart drugs as soon as we got him home. Maybe wean him off, because there could be some problem when you just kind of cut things cold turkey, but wean him off right away and get him off the drugs in the first month or two, and he would have never had a tachycardia. The drugs never controlled it. God healed it. And that's a fact. And so our little small but mighty guy is with us, and he's joyful, and he can be a pain sometimes because he's so strong-willed and stubborn, but he is joyful and happy and funny and cute, and he's healed, and that's God's doing.
Yes.
Anything else about Rennie, my dear?
No.
All right. It's hot out here.
Children.
Until next time, shalom, friends. Thanks for watching.